The Constructors Association of Western Pennsylvania and Franz Seppler and Associates is pleased to introduce a new type of anti-harassment training called Respect in the Workplace. The purpose of this new program is to educate company managers and supervisors on how to build a more respectful workplace environment through a series of educational videos. Instead of traditional compliance training that solely focuses on legal definitions and standards for liability, this program focuses on respect, acceptable workplace conduct, and the types of behaviors that contribute to a respectful workplace. Why is it important to create a culture of respect in the workplace? 1. Increases productivity and quality of work. 2. Makes your project a place where employees want to show up and give their best. 3. Prevents your workplace from becoming hostile and toxic. The following video, A Supervisor's Role in Creating a Respectful Workplace, was developed specifically for project supervisors. As a supervisor, your job is to deal with unprofessional, disruptive, damaging, or potentially damaging interpersonal conduct. The following video provides supervisors with the necessary tools to manage difficult people, handle employee complaints, and build a workplace environment on a foundation of respect.
Hi, I'm Franz Seppler. I'm a consultant, an educator, and a workplace investigator. And this is a session focused on the specific skills and knowledge that supervisors need to contribute to a respectful work environment. In our initial Zoom presentation, you heard how important creating a respectful environment was to the success of your worksite. Today, we're going to talk about your special responsibilities in that regard. So let's start. As a supervisor or manager, what is it that you are required to do? Most importantly, you model respectful behavior. Now, I do an exercise when I'm doing live training in groups of employees, and I've been doing it for a really long time. I ask a simple question, and no matter where I am, what part of the country I'm in, what industry I'm dealing with, I always get the same answers. And the question is, what do people do and say that make you feel respected in your workplace? 100% of the time, the answers include listen. That means that when someone's talking to you, you're fully present. You actually care what they have to say. Number 2, show interest. Recognize that employees are human beings. Show an interest in their hobbies outside of work, their family, their vacations, whatever. And more importantly, remember what they told you so that when somebody tells you that their parent is going through some medical difficult times, you're able to, a week later, say, hey, how's your mom? How's your dad? Number 3, ask people's opinions. People really want to be heard, and they want to be able to offer their ideas, their thoughts, and their opinions in the workplace. You don't have to accept every one, but when you ask, you show interest and you listen, it tells people that they matter. And then finally, and this may sound incredibly simple, the number one answer we get to that question is, greet me. Acknowledge me, say good morning, remember my name, remember my pronouns. Whatever it is, address the employee as a human being, know what they like to be called, and pay attention to them. These things are not time-consuming, they're not expensive, and they pay off in incredible premiums in the way that people then feel as though they have permission to broach issues with you, or to know that you'll recognize if they're doing a good job. Beyond modeling your own respectful behavior, it is really important that you not think that your only obligations in terms of people's behavior is to stop serious bad behavior. We know that effective supervision involves addressing small instances of disrespect, such as incivility and rudeness. It may seem as though you're policing people or trying to take the fun and humor out of the workplace. But as you saw in our initial Zoom presentation, it's been shown that even a single incident of serious disrespect or incivility can affect people for up to 2 weeks. We may think we can shrug it off, but the brain science tells us differently. It affects us. It affects the way we show up, it affects the way we do our jobs, and it affects the way we deal with other people. So calling people out on those acts of incivility or disrespect is contributing to the quality of the work and the quality of the work environment. When it comes to more serious behavior, such as bullying and harassment, you have an obligation to immediately intervene. That intervention is going to depend on the situation. It may be stopping it in its tracks, or it might be just reporting it up. But it is your obligation under the law to take action, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then finally, and something we're going to talk about today, is when somebody does come to you and they complain to you or they make a report to you of behavior that shouldn't be happening in your workplace, you need to handle that complaint with skill and concern. You know, my firm did some research about 25 years ago, and we looked at what happens after people come forward with complaints, whether they're complaints of bullying, harassment, discrimination. What we did was we looked at where people were a year after they brought their initial complaint. We found that many of them were gone from the workplace. They'd quit or been fired. And many of them stayed. And those who quit or were fired were far more likely to bring a claim through an enforcement agency or to file a lawsuit. What was the difference between those two groups? Well, what we found was that when they complained, what was said and what was done within the first 24 hours was a significant indicator of whether a year later they were going to be at work doing their jobs, fully employed in a good relationship with their employer, or whether they'd be gone. So how you respond to an employee with a complaint is a big deal, and that's why we're going to talk about specifically what to do and what to avoid. So if you'll recall from our initial Zoom presentation, we talked about behavior along a continuum. All the way to the left, you see respectful behavior, what we want in the workplace, the things that make people thrive. And then we moved into more gray area, what we've just been discussing, that disrespectful or rude behavior. Nobody is going to get fired for a single act of disrespect, and rudeness is part of the human condition. But we do know when those things are persistent in the workplace, they degrade the work environment and that they're contagious. That if people are allowed to be disrespectful and rude, you're going to have a disrespectful and rude workplace, and you're going to have lots of problems and conflicts because of it. Then we moved into bullying, right there in the center of the continuum. And as you'll see in a supplemental video presentation, bullying is a serious problem. It isn't, however, illegal. In none of the 50 states is being mean or rude or abusive to somebody without regard to their identity a crime or a civil violation. It is, however, something that smart employers make sure doesn't happen in their workplace, because there's nothing good that comes out of it and a lot of bad that does. You should take responsibility for ensuring that there is no bullying in your work environment or within your control. When we move further along the continuum, then, we move into two areas that are, in fact, unlawful. Unlawful harassment is basically abusive behavior that is directed at somebody because of or inclusive of their identity. If I treat all my employees equally badly, I'm a bully. But if I treat only the men or only the women or only people of color, or only people who are not Native Americans badly, then that's discriminatory harassment, and that's unlawful. It is a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and there are federal laws that protect me. There's also state laws that probably apply to you. Finally, assaultive behavior, getting involved in physically assaulting somebody, is criminal as well as a civil violation, and it can result in people being imprisoned. We're going to talk today about how to respond to any employee complaint, but we're going to talk particularly about what to do if you've been notified of behavior that may be unlawful. So we talk about a gateway to liability. When does an employer become liable? When can an employee sue an employer? When can the government take enforcement action against an employer? The gateway to liability establishes the conditions under which there can be legal liability. And by the way, that liability sometimes can go not just to your employer, but to you individually as a supervisor. And the standard that is used is knew or should have known. When you knew or you should have known that behavior that violated the law was happening. Now, what does that mean? Knew or should have known. When do you know? Well, you know when somebody tells you about it. You know when you see it. You know when you hear it, or you hear about it from a reliable third party. And certainly, you know if you did it. That's knowing. And once you know, you know. You can't unknow it. You can't forget it. You can't pretend you don't know about it. That's the standard. How about should have known? What does should have known mean? It means that if you were doing your job, if you were properly supervising or properly managing, you should have known about it. So if you walk through a work environment every day and the use of slurs or inappropriate touching or comments about people's appearance are being made with some degree of regularity, you should have known about it, whether you actually witnessed it or not. That really speaks to your responsibility to monitor the work environment and to become aware of things. I worked on one case in which supervisors would come on the job. They'd go sit in an office and close the door and never walked around, never actually connected with people on the work site. When very serious behavior was ultimately reported, their view was, I didn't know about it. And in that particular case, it didn't take very long for a judge to snap back and say, you certainly should have known. So once you know, or you should have known, what then? Well, the standard of liability gives you basically a three-legged stool. It says that there's not just one thing or two things that you need to do. There are actually three. Number one, you need to respond promptly. I wish I could tell you that there's some sort of calendar you could use to tell you what prompt is, but it's one of those things you know it when you see it. What it means is you take any instance of potential harassment or assault and you make it your highest priority. This is the thing you need to deal with right now, immediately. It can't wait overnight, it can't wait a day, it can't wait a week. You need to take some sort of action. And there's the second standard. The action must be appropriate. Well, that's a pretty broad word. But what it means is that you're taking action that is consistent with the way the organization has dealt with this behavior in the past and proportional. So if somebody has told an inappropriate joke, you don't summarily fire them. You process that the way you have processed other similar kinds of instances. It needs to be consistent with your policy and any written procedures you have about how these things are supposed to be handled. And then finally, the third step on the stool is effective. What does that mean? Effective means it stops. And that's the biggest. You know, in the course of dealing with behavior in the workplace, there's not many promises you can make to somebody who's coming forward with a complaint. You can't promise that they're going to be satisfied with the outcome. You can't even promise that an investigation is going to agree with what they've said. But what you can promise them, and you should promise them either out loud or in your head, is that if the behavior that's happening violates our policy and the law, it's going to stop. And that means that once you're aware of behavior that's creating a problem, you don't have to decide if it's unlawful or not, but you sure do have to make sure it's going to stop. And speaking of that, unlawful, the concept of unlawful, let the lawyers worry about that. A big mistake that I've seen over and over the course of my career is a supervisor being told of some problem, giving the employees some advice, or saying, I'll talk to them, and not thinking much of it. Later, when that supervisor is in trouble because they knew or should have known, they will say things like, well, they didn't call it sexual harassment, or they never said they thought they were being discriminated against. You don't need them to say it, nor do you need to establish that all of the legal elements that we discussed in our initial video, that it be unwelcome, that it be repeated, that it be pervasive, that's not for you to judge. If you hear the behavior and you say, gee, this could be harassment or assault, act as though it is. Really, as a supervisor, you should be dealing with unprofessional, disruptive, damaging, or potentially damaging interpersonal conduct without regard to whether it might be or might not be unlawful. Your role is to make sure that this information gets into the hands of somebody who's equipped to address it. There may need to be an investigation, there may not, but that's a decision you should be making with somebody who's well-trained. Something else I want to caution you about. It is very common for somebody to come forward to you and to say, I want to tell you about something that's bugging me. I want to tell you about something that happened to me, but I don't want you to do anything about it. They're saying that because maybe they don't want the person to get in trouble, but more likely they're afraid of what will happen if you investigate. Remember the standard, knew or should have known. Person doesn't want you to do anything, but now you know about it, you have an obligation to act. So be very careful of ever agreeing to keep something confidential. In fact, my advice to you is that you should never use the word confidential with an employee. What an employee thinks when you say confidential is no one will ever know about this. Well, you can't do that. If you know about it, you've got to share it with somebody who can address it. You can't keep anything confidential. What you can do is say that if they're feeling unsafe, you can help them with that. Tell them you won't share anything you're not obligated to share. Find out what their concerns are and address them. And let them know that if you weren't to bring this forward, it's unlikely the situation would repair itself and more likely that it would get worse. So do encourage them to go ahead and tell you, even though you have to share it with someone else. And if they do decide to stay silent, they say, well, if you can't keep it confidential, I'm not going to tell you. Well, then you have an obligation to follow up with them. I know a few days ago you came to me, you didn't want to give me the information, but I'm concerned about you. We want people to feel respected and safe here. Is there anything you want to tell me now, or is there somebody else you might be more comfortable speaking with? Document that you've done that and continue to follow up for a good long period of time. One more legal aspect to think about. When you look at the statistics from the EEOC, which is the federal agency responsible for collecting complaints from people about discrimination, harassment in their workplace, you find that over half of the complaints are not actually about discrimination or harassment, but instead are about retaliation. Somebody being punished for having made a report or a complaint. Now, you as a supervisor also are protected from retaliation for receiving a complaint or a report or making one on your own. What does retaliation look like? Well, it can be denying promotion or benefits to people. It can be demoting, suspending, or firing somebody. It can be threatening someone, reprimanding somebody, or transferring an employee who doesn't want or need to be transferred. It can be disparaging an employee to other employees or to other managers without cause. It can be making false reports about an employee without cause, and undue scrutiny of an employee's work. Now, as a supervisor, you have to scrutinize employees' work, and giving people feedback, even very critical feedback, is important. It's important for safety and it's important for quality. However, if you do that in order to punish somebody for having raised an issue, that can be viewed as retaliatory, and retaliation is considered just as serious as underlying harassment or discrimination. So now that we've gotten the legal technicalities out of the way, let's talk about what you might do if an employee does come forward and want to tell you about something that's going on. When an employee is experiencing harassment or discrimination or even bullying in the workplace, they go through a pretty predictable pattern. First, they tell themselves that they can cope, and they try to ignore it or avoid it. And sometimes that's good enough and the behavior doesn't continue, and it never gets reported because it doesn't have to be. It's not persistent, it's not pervasive. But if the behavior continues and the individual isn't able to avoid it or ignore it, they start to feel emotionally and psychologically affected by it. This could be anything from losing their ability to concentrate, to feeling dread or fear about encountering the person or people who are doing it to them, to just feeling unsafe and uncomfortable in their workplace. And what your average human being is going to do when they're feeling afraid or uncomfortable or embarrassed or ashamed or at risk is they're going to try and get away from the source of the problem. And so if I'm an employee that's coming every day to a workplace where I'm being subjected to name calling, inappropriate humor, being humiliated, being made afraid, my brain is going to be telling me to get out of there. We all learned about that, right? Flight or fight. And so you're going to see some degradation in their attendance. You're going to start seeing people who are calling out more than is acceptable. You're going to find people who are starting to show lateness, showing up to the work site late, leaving early, taking excessive breaks, disappearing so nobody can find them. And of course, as a supervisor, you're going to do what you have to do. You got somebody who's not showing up, you're going to give them the feedback that that's not okay. Maybe it's even going to reach a point where there needs to be some discipline for that. Well, if I'm an employee and I'm miserable at work, and my first sort of human response, trying to stay away from it, trying to avoid it, didn't work, and I'm now taking more extreme measures by calling out or disappearing, I'm going to realize that the thing I'm worried about, that I'm going to lose my job, is more threatened by not showing up at work. So I'm going to show up at work, but I might have an attitude. I may be a jerk. I may be angry all the time. I may be sullen and withdrawn and resentful. I may be snarky and rude with my coworkers. And two things are going to happen. One is that my coworkers aren't going to want to work with me. They're not going to want to be around me, so I'm going to be isolated. And the other is you as my supervisor are going to try and fix that and give me feedback that that's not okay. I'm not going to get anywhere if I keep treating other people like that. Well, that's not going to feel very good either. So I'm going to feel even more stressed at work. And no doubt my performance is going to suffer. I don't have colleagues around who are going to help me. I'm isolated, I'm angry, I'm upset, and I don't really care how good a job I do. Now we've got performance problems. So think about it. You got a person who's not showing up. When they show up, they've got a crappy attitude and they're not doing their job very well. You're not very happy with that person. You're probably thinking of that person as a not very good employee. Yet that may be the employee who shows up to tell you about something that actually is at the root cause of all of this. And so what we never say to someone who's showing up with a complaint is, you didn't seem to have a problem with harassment before you got a write-up for lateness last week, or weren't making any complaints of bullying until I nicked your performance. You don't know. You don't know if it's a chicken or if it's an egg. So a ground rule you should consider is that there's no value to trying to get to the bottom of things. When somebody comes to you with a complaint, for the time being, take concerns at face value. Just assume that what they're saying to you is correct. We do investigations and we find out if what they're saying is correct or not correct. You don't need to cut to the chase. Rather, you need to let them tell you their story and let a good professional process sort out what's real and what's not. So what we know is that people coming forward have gone through this process of deciding to do it. They have worked through a fear of retaliation. They've worked through the fear that nothing will happen. They've worked through the concern that the wrong thing will happen. They've worked through the concern that they'll be blamed for what happened. They have finally decided that what's going on is serious enough, is problematic enough that they want to complain. And they want three things. They want to be heard. They want to be fully understood. And they want to be believed. So we can listen. We can really listen to what they have to say. We can show that we understand the experiences and the emotions they're having. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. And while we can't say and should never say to somebody, I believe you, because we don't have enough information to say that, we can refrain from disbelieving or doubting them in this moment. As we've just said, there will be a time when an investigator will be doing that doubting, but it's not now. So I want you to think about a pretty simple model or a pretty simple acronym we can use to think about how we should respond to employee complaints, and that is SAFE. We want to be supportive, which is to let them know that they've done the right thing by coming forward. We want to be affirming by recognizing and naming what we see and what we hear. We want to be fair and let them know that we have a process for dealing with things. And we want to be ethical. We want to be behaving according to some basic human principles. In this case, that everybody who has a concern or a grievance should be treated with dignity and respect in the process. So how do we do that? We do that by thanking people for trusting us and telling them we're interested in hearing what they have to say. We do that by recognizing people's emotions. This is a really powerful tool we have. When people are coming forward and telling us about something that's causing them harm or causing them pain, we can recognize how they're feeling. And that's an extraordinary tool. When you say to somebody, I can see this is making you angry. I can see this is really hard for you to talk about. I can tell you're pretty upset about this. It says that we understand the import of what they're telling us, that we get that this is causing them to have feelings that don't feel very good. There's something almost magical that happens when we are able to recognize people's emotions, in that they calm down, often visibly, and feel as though they don't have to be quite as animated in telling their story. The best example I can give to you of this involves the way we might deal with quarreling kids. I know I raised 2 kids, and they had their share of fights and spats. And it would usually involve one of them coming and what we would call tattling to me. Mom, I was just sitting there minding my own business, and my sister punched me in the arm, and I think it's broken, and she should go to jail. Well, as a parent, we might have a first instinct to say, oh, would you stop it already? I'm tired of the 2 of you fighting all the time. And stop with the your arm is broken, your arm isn't broken, stop exaggerating. But if we do that, if we engage in bad parenting in that situation, what's the kid going to do? They're going to say it is broken, it's broken in 3 places, and you're a terrible mother, and now we're going to have a bigger problem. Similarly, when employees come to us with their concerns, and they exaggerate or they paint it in a picture that we think is a little overstated or magnified, if we tell them, oh, just calm down, it can't possibly be that bad, they're going to ramp it up. But if we say, wow, you're really upset, tell me what happened. Well, or if we say something like, there's no hitting isn't allowed in this house. If somebody's hitting, that's not okay. Or in our workplace, well, we have policies that prohibit that sort of thing. If that's happening, it's not okay. We now let them know that they've walked in the door, and we're not going to disbelieve them. We're going to listen to them. When we name the emotions, it allows them to reduce the amplification of their story so they're no longer magnifying. And now we can get the facts. So being fully present, listening without interrupting, listening without doubting, and naming the feelings are really part of that safe model of complaint handling. Having counseled a lot of supervisors and managers who didn't do it well, I can tell you some things to avoid. Here are some things I ask you not to say. Why are you just coming forward now? So the average person bringing forward a complaint of sexual or racial harassment in the workplace waits 12 to 16 months to do it because they've been too afraid, too uncertain, or many other reasons. They felt that coping with the behavior is better than reporting it. By the time they're reporting it to you, it means they're really hurting. They're really being affected by it. And that's why they're just bringing it forward now. Don't ask them to explain it. They're bringing it forward now, and that's really all you need to know. Here's another thing to avoid. Well, I've known so-and-so for X many years. I have a tough time believing that. That doesn't sound like so-and-so. Are you sure they weren't just joking? Are you sure you didn't misunderstand? What that comes across as is I'm trying to talk you out of your complaint. I'm trying to make you second guess yourself. And even worse, I really don't believe you very much. Once you've gone there, the person is probably going to say, I don't have a chance of this being taken seriously, and shut down. Or they're going to get angry with you and say that you're part of the problem. No one wants to invite that. Here's another question that I've heard supervisors and managers ask complaining employees, and this one backfires for sure. Well, what was your part in it? That's a real gotcha question. I don't know that anybody has ever been asked, what was your part in it, who came back and said, oh, well, now that you asked me that, I realize this was all my fault. It's just not a good question, and it should be avoided at all costs. 2 more. Why do you think they did those things? Unless that employee happens to have a psychology degree or be a psychiatrist, it's really not their job to figure out people's motives. And asking them to explain somebody's behavior when that behavior was potentially harmful seems sort of a unproductive question. And finally, while you may well be curious, this is not the time to say, have you told them to stop? You can ask, how did you respond? But if you say, have you told them to stop? What happens in their head is like, oh no, what's the right answer here? If I say no, are they going to say that I brought this on myself? And if I say yes, does it mean that, I didn't do it well? So you'll get the very same information when you say, how did you respond to that? And that way it won't suggest to them that there's a right or a wrong answer. Now, when you have this conversation with an employee, let them tell you everything they want to tell you. Listen very carefully, and don't drill down too far into the who, the what, the where, and the when. If they share that with you, or if it's pretty easy to ask the question, go ahead. But remember, this isn't an investigation, it's an intake. And what you really need is the contours, the outline of the story to be able to figure out what your next steps are. The most important thing is that when you say to the person, have you told me everything you think I need to know, that they answer yes. And then you confirm two things. Do you feel safe at work right now? And if the answer is no, then obviously you're going to have to take some immediate action. And the other thing you want to tell them is, here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to share this information with so-and-so. I'm going to pass this on. I'm going to take some time to write this down, and I'm going to give that information to X person. Here's what you should expect. You should expect to hear back from them or from me by when. Our policy says that these things get investigated. It's very possible there will be an investigation. You will know that shortly. And then do be sure you document that conversation. Please don't do your documentation while you're talking to the employee. It's fine to write some simple notes, but you shouldn't be trying to transcribe the entire conversation. Sit down after they've spoken to you and write down what you remember. What did they tell you? And then share that information with the appropriate parties. Keep those notes or a copy of those notes and make sure that you memorialize and you write down what you did once you got this complaint. Who did you discuss it with? Who did you give the information to? And if you were instructed to take further actions, such as to follow up with a couple of other employees, or to inspect a physical area, or to gather certain kinds of evidence, please make sure you make note of that. When you do that, you provide yourself the best defense should there be a claim that you didn't handle the situation properly. Finally, and lastly, you thank the employee for coming to you. You affirm to them that they've done the right thing, and you let them know that you take it seriously. What my firm's research shows is that if you follow those principles and you avoid the avoidables, you're going to have great odds that the employee is going to be able to return to the workplace and be a productive member of your workforce. Thanks for your time.